Hello.
Hello, hi, how's it going?
Very good. How are you?
Yes, very well, thanks. You hear
Yeah,
me okay? You're coming through the
yeah, I
mic.
can hear you okay. Thank you so much for taking the time.
No, my pleasure, mate. Not at all.
Has it been a busy week, I imagine?
Yeah, like so far, not too bad. Tuesday was down at England, going off to Scotland today, and um, got an interview with the Welsh coach coming up. So yeah, a few bits and pieces, but
Nice.
yeah, they're pretty cool these weeks, building up to the game.
Yeah, yeah. How is it the game you're most excited for this weekend or
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely. I mean, Wales Ireland in recent years would be box office, but it's more interesting now they've made those changes, but it's not it's more one-sided than it used to be, that game, isn't it? And
Mhm.
even though Scotland England's been one-sided, it's never been, Scotland haven't really blown England away, apart from yes maybe the 2018 game. So it's a yeah, this the Saturday game's the big one this weekend, I think. The England game for sure.
Yeah, yeah, brilliant. Well, if you don't mind, I'm just going to kind of crack on. I'm just going to ask
Yeah,
you
yeah,
mostly
absolutely.
about the game on Saturday, but I'll kind of get your thoughts and towards the end about just the competition as a whole, maybe a
Yeah,
couple of teams,
yeah,
just lines. But yeah,
of course, of
go into
course.
it. So looking at the Calcutta Cup, I guess, what were your kind of earliest or favorite memories of this fixture?
Oh, great question. I think I remember my dad took me to Twickenham maybe in early 90s, so it would have to have been a kind of odd numbered year, wouldn't it? So it might have been 1993, for example. I think Rob Andrew kicked a load of goals. Maybe that's 95. Can't quite remember. But it always was a game that had such great history to it. I think coming from with Welsh background, the England Wales game was always incredibly special, sort of emotionally for my family. But England Scotland had a great history as well. Although for most of the 90s and the noughties and parts of 2010s, England were pretty dominant. I think there was only four Scotland wins kind of from the early 90s through to the early 2020s. So the fact it's turned around the last few years has been so interesting and kind of breathed real life again into this fixture, because back in sort of late 80s, mid 80s, when Scotland won the Slam in 84 and they won at Twickenham in 83, and obviously the very famous game in 1990, which you couldn't really avoid growing up at when I did in the late 80s and early 90s. You couldn't avoid that 1990 game, the history of it, the way it was quite politically charged. Scotland going for the Slam, England going for the Slam, Scotland's famous win, the long walk onto the pitch from David Soul. So a fixture just laced with history, and I think now more than ever in my lifetime, the fixture just got a real kind of bite rivalry and a kind of jeopardy about it.
Yeah, I would definitely feel the same way, especially, I mean, when my first Scotland game was in 2007. And I mean, our sort of early 2010s, it was actually, the Calcutta Cup was always an extremely bleak
Mm.
encounter. It was never had the kind of fierce rivalry that it has at the moment. Where do you hold it in regard to other Six Nations rivalries? Because as someone who's, I mean, I know I understand it, as someone who's from Edinburgh, grew up in Scotland, but then went to university in Bristol, so I've got a lot of English mates. A criticism I often hear towards us is that we hold this rivalry in a uh, much higher regard than England fans do. England fans
Yes.
consider it the biggest rivalry. Do you feel the same way? Do you hold it? Where do you hold it in regard to other rivalries in the competition?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. I think there is, and the, the nature of the Six Nations, the nature of the home nations, with England being the biggest country with the best resources and the biggest population, there's always this feeling of kind of, the big brother and little brother, and whether English people or Welsh people or Scottish people won't like it to be put in those terms. The reality is, for a country like Wales, for example, with its small population, its fewer resources, to beat England in any sport on a level playing field is a huge achievement and an unbelievable motivation. And the best thing about the Six Nations, which no other sport has, is the fact that the home nations, regardless of their population size, regardless of their wealth, their finances, their rugby resources, regardless of that, they're able to go to sporting battle every year on a level playing field. We don't get it in football. There's no Home Nations Cup in football. In rugby league, doesn't happen on a regular basis. In cricket, the England and Wales cricket board's amalgamated, and you get Scottish players and Irish players playing cricket for England. Kevin Hamilton, Owen Morgan, and people Boyd ranking. So it's completely different in rugby union. They're their own unions, they're their own rugby countries, and it leads to these brilliant rivalries. Now, there is the reality is that for a Welsh fan and a Scottish fan, England might be the biggest fixture for both of them. And then for an England fan, they might say, well, actually, it's France, or it's New Zealand, or it's South Africa, or it's Australia, or it's Wales, or it's Scotland. So it's quite. I think it depends, but on the whole, I would say that every team in the Six Nations still does want to beat England. I think it has changed a little bit over the years in the sense that when Wales were going very well, their biggest rivalry at a time was Ireland. And Ireland were the team that were probably their biggest threat to winning the title, say in early 2010s, for example. So it definitely can change. I definitely get what you're saying that for some Scots, beating England and playing against England is massive and it's huge. But I think England have to get into that mind space this weekend because they've been able to win the Calcutta Cup in previous years without being completely at their best, and Scotland haven't been able to come up with much. And when they have been able to win Calcutta Cups, say in 2008 or in 2000, it was obviously often a bleak day at Murrayfield, lots of kicking and a kind of back to the wall effort. Scotland have completely flipped that narrative now. They've played amazing rugby. They've outscored England in terms of tries, and they've scored some magnificent tries playing brilliant rugby that we've seldom seen in this fixture, probably since the early 90s and parts of the 80s. So England, they can't afford to go, oh, well, it means more to Scotland this weekend because they've won one of the last seven. England have to get into mind space and a headspace where this fixture is their biggest of the year because it's absolutely critical for England to win this weekend because if they don't, all that momentum they've just started to get after the France game will be completely evaporated. So it's a huge game for England this weekend, massive game for Scotland, but I think it's just a must win for England if they're going to make any kind of scratch on this Six Nations.
Hmm. And actually, going on with that kind of momentum that England have at the moment, what really struck me about the rhetoric around both teams after round two was that was the complete shift in narrative. So England after the autumns, it was looking relatively bleak because it was a very frustrating autumn despite some good performances. And now, if they were to beat Scotland, and obviously depending what happens in the Ireland France game, they would fancy their chances perhaps in the tournament. And then Scotland, obviously, you have to take into account the injuries they've had. But now even if they were to beat Ireland, they now stare down the barrel of another trophyless campaign. And many
Mm.
think that Townsend's done all he can. What are your thoughts on this kind of complete shift in narrative in just the space of a week?
Yeah, it's mad, isn't it? And it felt like that tournament from the start. You felt that if Ireland got off to a winning start against England, they could well win the title because they've got Scotland's number, they've got France at home, and apart from that, they've just got to, their other games, Wales and Italy, they'd really you'd expect them to win. So from day one, it's kind of had that feel. And England losing as they did in Ireland, I wondered how demoralising and debilitating that would be. So the fact they got that France win, whether in fortunate circumstances or not, they did brilliantly to get it done. They have to capitalise now. Scotland, they're in such a difficult situation. I do feel for Townsend because if you were to say to a Scotland fan that Townsend's record in the Calcutta Cup would be 1-5, drawn one, lost one, and yet still people would be questioning whether he has taken the team as far as he can, you'd think that's extraordinary. How high are the standards in Scottish rugby? But I suppose that's the detail is that while he's done brilliantly against England, the 10 defeats or the 11 defeats against Ireland are a big blot on his record, and Scotland just haven't been able to take that next step. Now, it might be that this Scotland team are unlucky because they're in an era where France is strong, Ireland is strong, England are fairly strong, whereas previously there have been campaigns when Italy have been weak, Scotland have been weak, France have been weak, England and Wales middling, Ireland middling, and you could probably win a championship without being an outstanding side. I don't think you can do that anymore. I think you have to be an outstanding side even to win a championship, let alone a Grand Slam. So it's just brutal for Scotland because the Ireland game felt like their big one of this Six Nations, and a kind of defining game for this group of players because it was going to signify whether they could be a 4 from 5 team and compete for the title. And the reality is they haven't been able to deliver. Now they beat England, they win in France, and it's a brilliant campaign. But you just worry about how much stuffing was knocked out of them by that Ireland game. As for Townsend's position, he's contracted for another year. If he goes at the end of his contract, I mean, he can hold his head well and truly high. He'd have done 9 years. He'd have really taken Scotland from a team that was 10th, 11th, 12th in the world. I know they were having an uptick under Cotter, but to establish themselves a top six side as he's done, and maybe going and being a top four side in the world, that might just be where Scotland are with their resources unless they completely change the pathway. They revolutionise the sport, the grassroots and the structures up to the national side, and that could take time. So yeah, it's hard to know exactly where Scotland are, but you just feel that Ireland game was a sign that however good they've been, they maybe are not quite ready or maybe won't get there to the next step at the moment.
Yeah, it really had shades of the World Cup game in Paris,
Mm.
just under 2 years ago. Actually, that was, I mean, I was at the game, and it was, as a Scotland fan, it was quite a sobering watch. I mean, obviously we weren't at our best. We had a couple bad injuries very early on, but it just felt like we had nothing for them. And even though they're both kind of very established teams, the difference in quality, especially in the forwards, was pretty yeah, was kind of really clear for everyone to see. If we look at England, how would you kind of assess the job Borthwick's done so far, and especially in this campaign compared to his previous two campaigns now? Are there any major differences you've spotted?
Well, Borthwick talks a lot about the team's evolution and about their attacking game. That's his massive focus at the moment is about how England are improving their attack. And in some ways, you go, do you know what? It's still quite a clunky attacking side, and in others, you go, well, they scored 4 tries against France, and they scored 3 against Ireland, and they're doing all right in terms of how many points they're scoring. They're probably still, would need to get over that 25-point barrier a few more times, but they're not. They scored 22, I think, against Ireland and 27 against France. So and New Zealand was 23 or 24. So they're really not far off in terms of getting the number of points you need to win test matches against top teams, which is around about 25. Scored plenty against Australia, but then leaked some. The frustrating thing for Borthwick is just every time they make progress in one area, they seem to go backwards in another. They were making progress with their attacking game at the end of 2024. Then their defence tailed off. They had to change defence coach, had to change they've changed their fly half now. There's always things that are slightly changing. So England always feel like they're in a little bit of a state of flux. Borthwick's had 31 test matches now, though, and I think he's still asking for time. And that France win will mean he will get time. He will definitely get, I think, through to the 27 World Cup. That's how important that France game was because they've got a development tour of Argentina, an autumn where they'll pick up 2 wins at least, you'd imagine. Then suddenly it's the 2026 Six Nations. And they've got the likes of Wales and Ireland at home. So I just think England fans want now a bit more consistency. They've not strung together results. They did at the World Cup, but in the Six Nations, no England teams put together more than a couple of wins in a row in 5 years. It's constantly been one step forward, one step back. And they've been having had a really tough start with their schedule. They've now got they could not ask for any better now than Scotland home, Italy home, Wales away, and they just have to capitalise on it. And really, they should be setting themselves the standard and the message that nothing more than 3 wins over this next period, 4 wins in total. That has to be the standard they've got to reach.
Mm. And if you look at because I mean, what a big criticism I've seen of Borthwick amongst sort of England fans is where where he's kind of placed Marcus Smith because it seemed like in the autumns that was a very kind of definitive stand of Marcus Smith is now going to be my 10.
Yeah,
Farrell's at the picture and Ford looks like he's a little bit past it now in the international game. But now, obviously, Finn Smith, did what he did against France. He's starting this Saturday, and once George Verbank is back in the picture, where does that leave Marcus Smith, who I guess before the tournament we were all talking about as potential starter for the Lions?
yeah, it's such an interesting topic because on the one hand, you've got Marcus Smith playing like he did in the autumn, setting up the try in the New Zealand game, making breaks in the South Africa game, lovely little ball for Slight home in the South Africa game, making stuff happen, England's best attacking outlet by miles. On the other hand, every time Marcus Smith starts at 10, England don't win the game. He started at 10 when they lost 53-10 to France. Not his fault, but it's just if you're Borthwick, you're scratching your head because you're going, here's the guy who does loads of brilliant things, but for some reason we're not getting over the line in these test matches. How is that happening? Now, is that Marcus's fault? It might not be. Is it because as great as he is with the ball in hand, he plays as a fly half, like he's a running fly half, and I can't remember too many examples in history of running fly halves. People that their best asset was running with the ball.
Mm.
Whereas you look at the great fly halves, they also have an ability to facilitate and to game manage, and that's obviously an area where Marcus is trying to improve. but it's an area where Finn Smith is so comfortable. So it's just a tricky one for Borthwick because he's tried to back Marcus Smith and he's given him a lot of test matches, but he probably would look at the end of the South Africa game and go, how did Marcus get the back line moving? How did he manage the team? How did he call the plays? And could he have done anything differently? And it's harsh because, again, he was England's best attacking weapon through the autumn, and he did some great stuff on the tour of New Zealand. But while England aren't winning matches, the questions will always remain about the key playmakers in 8, 9, 10, for example. Finn Smith's come in. He's now got a chance to make the shirt his own. It doesn't mean Marcus is going anywhere. He's always going to be an asset to an England 23. But I wonder if the best number on his back will be number 22 or 23, and someone who can come on and win games off the bench. And that's going to be very, very hard for him to take, given the player he is, the character he is, the lad he is. He wants to be England's number 10. But that might be, while if Finn Smith cements himself in the shirt, and it's very early days, that might be where Marcus can make his biggest impact and win the most test matches for England as a replacement coming off the bench, being able to cover fly half, outside back, full back.
Yeah, no, I almost feel. I mean, I don't obviously, wish him well this Saturday, but I almost feel quite bad for him in a way because there's so much. I mean, since he broke into the England squad initially, there's just the narrative is constantly around Marcus Smith because he probably is England's most talented player at the moment. And yet, he's now potentially playing out of position. I mean, it'll be very interesting to see how he fares against the likes of Duhan van der Merwe and Hugh Jones. But I mean, given the autumns, I just don't know whether that 15 role suits him.
Yeah, and he probably hasn't been. What was really interesting in Ireland was the way Jack Crowley came on and immediately started putting balls on him, which France didn't really do. But Finn Russell, if he plays, will 100% try and bring Marcus out of position with the range of his kicking. So Finn Russell is a very, very rare range of kicking, where everything from cross kicks to wiper kicks to Gary Owens, it's probably the most impressive part of his game is his breadth of kicking. So they will 100% go after Marcus defensively. And that's both when the Oppo have the ball, with, as you said, the strong runners Scotland have, but I think almost more importantly when Finn Russell's trying to kick him around. And yeah, as you say, with Furbank coming back, he'll be the starting fullback. Where that leaves Marcus as a starter, interesting question. Then you look at the centres, how well balanced are they? Ollie Lawrence is definitely an asset there. Henry Slade's a lovely player, but is Slade as authoritative as you want as a second playmaker? Is he a strong enough runner to be a kind of out and out 13? Does it, or is he a 12 that needs to link the play? So there's still a few question marks. And I think England are getting there slowly and steadily. They definitely need someone else to come through at centre to put pressure on those two. And when Furback is fit, and we probably won't have this conversation now till the autumn, because the likes of Furbank, Marcus Smith, Finn Smith, 1, 2, 3 of them could be all on the Lions tour. But it's a very, very likely we'll have this conversation again because fly halves are the poster boys. Finn Smith and Marcus Smith have the same name. They play in different ways, and it's a great kind of narrative for the media and the fans. So even if, yes, they're just one player in the ultimate team sport, I think this, given how both are similar, well, Marcus is a few years older, both are young, both play at 10. It's just a fascinating kind of storyline going forward.
Hmm. And if we look to Scotland, we obviously touched on the kind of not say criticism, but the sort of shifted narrative towards Gregor Townsend and the job he's done. How do you think Scotland have kind of fared with obviously the loss of Tuipulotu, Scott Cummings, and do you think that I guess what I was kind of confused by when it came to the criticism of Gregor Townsend, and obviously there's been close games in the Six Nations recently in which we could have won. I looked to the France game last year. I looked to the Wales game in 2021. But the thing that kind of struck me, especially when watching the Ireland game, was that, Scotland we've never been that team. We've never won 4 games in the Six Nations. We've never gone into the final round with it being in contention to win it. So do you think that there is a kind of false, I mean, there's always false hope when it comes to Scotland, but do you think there's a kind of a false confidence in our own ability, or do you think that 3 wins is the best is the best we can hope for?
Yeah. I mean, it's. I think it depends what you're accustomed to, and there will be a lot of Scotland fans who will remember Scotland through the 2010s. And don't get me wrong, they were a decision away from a World Cup semi-final in 2015, and they had some big wins through the 2010s. You know, they won in Dublin. I think it was in 20 or in
Yeah,
Edinburgh in 2017 against Ireland. But they definitely won in Dublin 2010, I think,
yeah,
with Dan Parks kicking a last minute goal. Get my dates right, I think.
yeah.
But
2010 Croke Park. Yeah,
yeah, 2010 Croke Park. So there have been some marquee victories, but not any consistency, and too many games where Scotland have been overwhelmed by better opposition. So because Scotland are so much more competitive, and the fact that they can go toe to toe with South Africa for an hour, both at the World Cup and at Murrayfield recently, and they can beat Australia, and they can really compete with New Zealand as they did a couple of years ago in the autumn. And, you know, they've had times against New Zealand where they've not been a million miles away. Because of all this, I 100% understand why Scotland fans have more expectation. It's only understandable. You add to that the players they have, the Calcutta Cups they've won, and how do Scotland get talked up a bit too much? Well, maybe because they're spoken about as potential winners and they never win it. But I don't see any other option for Scotland, their players and their fans, than to try and be confident and to try and think that this group and these coaches are as well placed as they ever have been to win a Six Nations. And that is the fact. They are as well placed as they've probably been in 15, 20 years to win a Six Nations. Now, the fact that they haven't and they're probably not going to is really disappointing. But I don't really blame Scotland fans or Scotland players or Gregor Townsend for trying to talk confidently because they have shown that they can mix it with the best teams in the world. They just aren't quite able to beat them on a regular enough basis and a consistent enough basis. And that's why they always do seem a bit destined for, you know, playing for the places. But I think there is added context because it is clearly a better Scotland side than for many, many years of the Six Nations.
mm. And if you look at their starting 15, I guess is there what do you think what's kind of missing from Scotland's 23-man squad or even starting 15 that could get them over the line? I mean, you look at maybe someone else in the back row or maybe another second row as strong as
Yeah,
you have.
it's I don't know if it's back row because I think a combination, you know, and Andy Onyema Christie's injured, which doesn't help, but a combination of Christie, Dempsey, Fagerson,
Yeah.
Darge, Ritchie, yeah, that's decent options. If you've got all five of them in your 23 or four of them in your 23, I think that's pretty solid. Second rows, I know a few are coming through. Gregor Brown, for example, is highly thought of. So they're probably just conscious about needing a bit more in the second row. But I don't think the back five of their scrum is a major issue. I think it's probably depth in the front row, isn't it? When you think that Xander Fagerson often goes deep into the game. You know, they had Elliot Miller-Mills playing at Murrayfield last year, who did really well, but Miller-Mills hasn't really commanded a place in a Premiership side in his sort of long and well-travelled career. So there are players there that wouldn't, you think, get close to being in the Ireland, France, or England side. And maybe that's just the reality of a smaller player pool, but you feel that they could do with another couple of Xander Fagersons, couldn't they, to
Mm.
really boost their front row stocks. And it's a shame Adam Hastings has had his injuries, and we'll see if Fergus Burke gets a gig at some point. But cover for Russell, I think they're fine at 12. I think they're fine in the back three. There's enough at nine. Maybe need another nine to come through. They're maybe just a couple short. They're maybe just a couple short, and then it's then you look at tactics and motivation and psychology, and however good it's been in the Calcutta Cup, they just can't get it right against Ireland, and that's I think what will leave. However Scotland do the rest of this tournament, that will be the big soul searcher going forward, won't it? Is how on earth they get blown away by Ireland all the time and don't even get at the races against Ireland. And that's something that I think will hang over the Scotland team after the Six Nations, really, you know, frustratingly, because everyone hoped this year would be a bit different.
Yeah, definitely. And if you look actually, obviously, as I speak to you now, the team's not out yet, so it's not quite confirmed whether Russell's starting or not. But you would have maybe had him down as a shoe-in for starting 10 for the Lions, just purely based on the fact that if you look at both England and Ireland, they still weren't really sure of who their starting fly half was. I mean, obviously there was because there's contention with Pendergast and Crowley, and then obviously the two Smiths. Um, you know, if Finn Russell was to play on Saturday, do you think he still kind of needs to prove himself to be a starter in the actual test against Australia?
Yeah, I do, and everyone is running out of time, not just Finn and some of the Scotland players. After this weekend, there's only two rounds left, And yes, you might be able to make a late play or a late stake a late claim at your club. Very few clubs are going to be playing in the level of knockout rugby, Heineken Champions Cups finals, Premiership URC finals that will pique Andy Farrell's interest. So it's got to happen now. Where Finn is in a completely different situation to previous tours is there is no Dan Biggar or Owen Farrell or Johnny Sexton, who have commanded that Lions shirt going back to 2009. In 2013 it was Sexton's shirt, in 2017 it was Farrell's shirt, and then Sexton's, and Farrell went to 12, and in 2021 it was Biggar's shirt. So Finn is the main man. He's the only one with Lions experience. He's the only one who's played Test rugby for the Lions, and he, with 80 plus caps, he is by far on paper the leading contender. He just hasn't quite fired yet this Six Nations, while there is a real intrigue around someone like Sam Prendergast and someone like Finn Smith. So the Lions 10 landscape is so different to previous tours, completely and utterly different to, nearly every tour I can remember. In 01 there was Johnny Wilkinson, in 05 there was Johnny Wilkinson, in 09 there was Stephen Jones, who was, a double Grand Slam winner. So it's someone's shirt to grab. You feel it should be Finn, but he'll definitely need a couple of big performances this Six Nations just to be sure. He'll be on the plane either way, you'd imagine.
Yeah,
And he's playing for Bath, who should win the Premiership or certainly be in the final. So he'll have his chances, but he just probably needs to produce a performance just to remind Andy Farrell of how good he is. We know how good he is, but he would just need to cut the mistakes out of his game he had against Italy and just try and have that kind of really composed all-round performance with the bits of magic that he can provide. And yeah, for his sake, hopefully it comes Saturday or in Scotland's last two games. But that 10 jersey for the Lions and who goes on the plane is extremely interesting at the moment.
yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it seems to be more of a reliability thing than opposed to his actual talent, because we all know how much
Mm.
talent he has at his disposal. If we just look at the kind of competition as a whole, as someone who's obviously been watching the Six Nations for years now, how do you look at how the competition's progressed over the years? I mean, I've noticed quite a significant development, and even just since I've been watching since around sort of 2009, 2010, how have you viewed it as both a fan and a journalist?
Yeah, I think it is the tournament, the gift that keeps on giving. It continually enthralls. It is the only time in the year where rugby union dominates the sporting media space and is the equal, if not the better, of the Premier League for a short period only of 2 months, where the noise, the engagement, the numbers, the fan interaction, all of it is puts rugby union right at the forefront of the sporting landscape, and it's awesome, and it's continually enduring. You just hope that the best assets of the six, they're changing everything when it comes to TV next year, or if they're not changing the TV, they'll change the kickoff times to try and make it more TV friendly. You just hope that the best things about the Six Nations still endure, and that is the travelling support, the history, the rivalry, and that is why they're so reluctant to open it up. That's why they're so reluctant to bring someone else in. That's why they're so reluctant to relegate anyone, because they are worried about messing with the golden goose. The I was a little bit disappointed in Dublin that there weren't more England fans in there, and I just hope that wasn't the Irish Rugby Union going, right, let's not make too many tickets available for travelling fans. It's a very small stadium. Let's make it all Irish, which is their prerogative. But it is awesome when you're at a Six Nations game and you see the travelling fans, because no other competition has it. The Rugby Championship doesn't have it. The Super Rugby doesn't have it. Of course you can't. You can't travel around cross continental competitions like that. That is the magic of the Six Nations. You've got six countries all, an hour and a half, 2 hours away, even less in some cases. And I can understand why the organisers are reluctant to tamper with it. They just need to make sure that while trying to evolve the competition and trying to engage new countries if they can to make the Rugby Europe competition better, so then promotion relegation can be a thing, but also promotion relegation can't be so disastrous for the team getting relegated. They're going into a competition that really matters. That all needs to happen. But in the meantime, they have to make sure that the things that make the Six Nations so great still remain. And at the moment they are. And I think it's a tournament that continues to go from strength to strength.
Yeah, actually, I was going to quickly touch on the obviously the reports that TNT plan to bid for the rights for the Six Nations. I mean, how does the game expect to grow if it's taken off free-to-air channels? And what do you think the competition and the sport as a whole would lose if this was the case?
It's always a difficult conversation, and you know cricket's the best example. Um, and Sky have done an unbelievable job at cricket and brought loads of money into cricket, or more money into cricket than say Channel 4 or the BBC were bringing in. Yet, an England Test cricketer can walk down the street and not get recognised. Whereas when I grew up, people like Ian Botham, David Gower, Graham Gooch were household names. You know, they were some of the biggest deals in sport. So the profile of cricket, it is hard to argue the profile of cricket hasn't been affected by going behind a paywall. It's really, really hard to argue that. It might be someone can argue it. I just say it would be a hard argument to win to say the profile of cricket's not been affected by going off free to air. And so the danger is it would happen to rugby. I think at the moment rugby's got an incredibly fragmented media landscape that needs to be tidied up because there are too many people showing too many different parts of it. But there is enough on free to air with the Six Nations and enough access to clips digitally and highlight shows to engage a wide part of the audience. And then TNT can do what they did in the autumn. And I think what might happen is the TNT end up taking the summer and the autumn and really run a good narrative for the Nations Championship. And then whether it's just BBC, just ITV, whoever it might be, there is still, I'll be very surprised, despite the reports, I'll be surprised if there is no rugby on free to air at all when it comes to Six Nations. Whether it's just the one game a weekend on free to air, whether it's a highlight show, whatever it might be. What we've seen in some sports, say football with the Champions League highlights, and we've seen it in cricket with more clips going on free to air on, say, BBC Sport website, we have seen the governing bodies understand the impact and the value of being partnered with free to air. So I think it's a balance, and I think the Six Nations know it's a balance. And I think at the moment it's the conversations are ongoing, and it's hard to particularly predict an outcome. But I would say that TNT were you're quite encouraged by what happened in the autumn, which means they'll probably try and enhance their autumn offering and maybe bring it into the summer as well. But I would still be surprised if there was no rugby on free to air from a Six Nations point of view this time next year.
Do you mind repeating that last sentence just because the screen froze?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I just said what they do in the summer and who takes the summer and how they run that narrative from the from the summer tours into the Autumn Nation series. That's I think an open goal for a television broadcaster, but I still would be surprised if there is no Six Nations free to air in any shape or form. I think the Six Nations know it's a fine balance, and I think they are aware of the value that free to air brings, certainly by the conversations I've had with people in the Six Nations. How that manifests itself, we'll see. The conversations are ongoing, but I think they will look for some kind of balance, given now the Six Nations kind of have the media rights for the whole calendar year with the Nations Championship and the Six Nations. I think they'll like a balance where they have a partnered up with a channel that can give them a really great narrative through the Nations Championship, the summer and the autumn, but also try if they can to retain some footprint on free to air because I think every governing body out there knows the value of free to air, and we're seeing it with the Six Nations at the moment.
Nice. Okay, and then finally, just before I let you go, could I quickly get a prediction for what you think the final standings will be and for Saturday's game?
Yes, so I think Ireland now win the Grand Slam. I don't see France winning in Dublin, so I think this is not done with much conviction because England have just been so inconsistent in this championship. But I think England will finish second now because I would expect them to win their next three, leaving France in third, Scotland fourth, and then Italy and Wales. I think England will win on Saturday, but I think Scotland will beat Wales, and I think Scotland France will be a good game in Paris, but I'd probably back France to win it. And I do think Ireland will now go on and win a Grand Slam and cement themselves as an all-time great Six Nations team.
Maybe, I mean, maybe the greatest in my lifetime.
Yeah. Well,
Especially-
I mean, in terms of the accolades and the achievement, they would be the best. Now, you could argue that the '03 England side was extremely dominant, but I think the 2023 Ireland team won a Grand Slam without, the 2018 Ireland side needed that last second Johnny Sexton drop goal in Paris. The 2023 Ireland team didn't go to the well to that extent. They
No,
breezed past Wales in Cardiff. They were comfortable against England, especially after Freddie Stewart's red card. Scotland, but they were pushed by Scotland, but still, it wasn't a sort of last second win, was it? Yeah. So I think the 2023 Ireland side, and then you package the 23, 24, and 25 Ireland side together. If they can go on and win the Slam, there've been other great sides in Six Nations history, but a team to win three in a row would be unprecedented, and they would deserve all the accolades that came their way.
and also I think you would see shades of the third 2013 Lions test with the Lions test this year. I think it would just be Irish dominance. I mean, you might get a couple Scots in, you may get an English forward in there, but I just don't see
You definitely go. Yeah, you definitely have. I think if Furlong's fit, there's an argument for the Ireland front row, isn't there?
Mm,
There's an argument for the whole Ireland front row. I think Tyke Byrne always plays, and then Caelan Doris is probably captain. So that's
mm,
five in the pack at least. Gibson Park's the nine at the moment.
definitely.
Ten's up for grabs. Potentially Finn Russell if he, cements that. But
Bundyaki
you can have at least one Irish centre, aren't you?
I'd say maybe Bundyaki because Tuipulotu's obviously injured at the moment.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then
Fancy Keenan's probably still in within a shout, even though Kinghorn's been on great form.
James Lowe is, I mean, the wings are wide open. There's not much real express pace out there. So if you play James Lowe on the left wing with his boot, it means you can probably reconfigure your back line to you don't need as much kicking in your back line. So yeah, I think what was it in 2013, 10?
It was something like that. It was the third test.
Yeah,
It was over 10. I think it was Corbisiero, who else? Johnny Sexton, maybe Tommy Bowe were the only non-Welsh
Jeff
stars.
Parling.
Jeff Parling as well,
Jeff
yeah.
Parling was in the second row,
Mhm.
and I think it was 10 Welsh. So I think
In the
who
third,
else? So
was
in the
it?
third test, I think it was 10. I think so. We can get it up now, can't we? Lions. I think it was 10.
Not
Lions.
Sexton?
Oh,
Sexton, and then it was Roberts, Davis, 12, 13. And then
Um, let's have a look. I'm pretty sure we've got Tommy Bowe, Corbisiero, Jeff Parling, Sean O'Brien.
John O'Brien. No
So that's
Sexton.
Bowe one, Sexton two, Corbisiero three, Parling four, Sean O'Brien five. Yeah,
Okay, so 10, yeah.
because Warburton got injured in the second test, didn't he?
Yes, he did, yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, so Warburton could have played because he was tour captain. So it could have been 11. I wonder if Gatlin would have gone for as many as 11. But
No.
yeah, so I think
Just a quick
you could
word
be
on
right
that, actually. With a minute and a half, because I've got a minute and a half
yeah,
left on Zoom call. How would you assess Gatlin as a whole? Obviously, do you think it's kind of a tale of two halves, or do you think ultimately Welsh fans
definitely.
can raise
Yeah,
it?
definitely got to see it in two different stints. I think when the dust is settled, he'll still be remembered as a great Wales coach. Bought three Grand Slams. Extraordinary success given that England in Six Nations history have won two Grand Slams in the whole of the Six Nations in 25 years. So for Wales to do what they did under Gatlin first time round, but the odd kick away from World Cup finals, brilliant. But the second stint, apart from that World Cup, since the World Cup has been a bit of a shocker. And 14 in a row, I think his position became untenable. It's the right move to move on. And I think his legacy, while a little bit tarnished at the moment, I think in the fullness of time, he'll always be remembered as one of Wales's, if not Wales's best ever coach.
Perfect. Well, I mean, that's everything. I'd love to speak to you for longer, but I've got less than a minute here on this Zoom
No
call.
problem. No problem.
Time with me, and yeah, hopefully have a good one on Saturday.
No problems. Cheers, mate. Good chat.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Pleasure. Bye bye bye.